Facebook. Yeah, this is great.
Hey, how are you guys?
It's a great day to be alive.
Yes, it is. Welcome to Transition Before Transaction. So it's a rainy, yucky day here in Central Virginia. So
Glad you can't see it.
yeah, I hope you guys are somewhere warm and dry. Jay and I have managed to run into each other at Wegmans on our south side of the Richmond area. So we've got a lot of stuff happening around us, but we want to talk about legacy today.
Yes, legacy can mean a lot of different things, whether you want to keep your business and pass that on to the next generation, or you just want to make sure that your assets aren't squandered when you're no longer there to keep control of them.
Yeah, and actually with my clients, the economic aspect of legacy is certainly important, but equally important, I think, is kind of that more emotional or philosophical aspect of legacy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so I've got a story. I don't know. Do you know how the Nobel Prize started?
Wasn't that the person who was big in gunpowder and
Yes, I didn't realize this. So
dynamite?
So for you guys that don't know this, so in 1888, a wealthy and successful man was reading what was supposed to be his brother's obituary in the newspaper, and the newspaper got it confused, and so they did his. And as he read, he realized that the editor had confused him with his brother, and that the headline said, "The Merchant of Death is dead."
True story?
That's
gosh.
Isn't that grim? And so it went on to describe a man who gained his wealth by helping people kill one another, going back to your point about the gunpowder. And so he was deeply troubled about it, and he got a glimpse of what his legacy might be. And so it's believed that particular incident was what was pivotal for Alfred Nobel to begin the Nobel Peace Prize.
That kind of sounds like the same thing that happened to Tony Stark, Iron Man. But that's for another story.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection actually, so you'll have to tell us.
You got to be
that
into
story.
Marvel comics, but yeah, same thing.
Well, I am, but anyway, so I'm Wendy Dickinson with Ascend to Sell, and I coach business owners through key transitions. So Jay, why don't you remind people what you do?
I am the owner of Business Owner Exit Strategies, and it's a practice designed to work with business owners to make sure that they're well prepared for their exit, whatever the timing and circumstances take place.
And so we end up having to have conversations with business owners about legacy quite a bit.
Absolutely. It's certainly important because for the vast majority of owners, 80 or 90% of their wealth is tied up in that business, and they have some decisions to make at some point as to who's going to get that business, how they're going to get that business to them, and what's the timing going to be. And what are the things that they need to do to get ready for that, even if they don't like to think about it.
How often do you feel like business owners have taken steps to not only put the framework for their legacy in place, but also have communicated?
Rarely, if ever.
Oh, gosh. Oh, come on, you guys.
I mean, it's I can't tell you how many times when they may, I will say that it might sort of cross their mind in like a nanosecond, and then they go, I don't have time to think about that. And certainly if they have been thinking about it, the real problem is they never put anything in writing. And you know what happens? If it's not in writing, it's not real. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, and in my experience also, it's not only important to put it in writing in the beginning, but to revisit whatever it is you've written down to make sure that it's still applicable as your business continues to grow and change.
Well, and another story I can share is one with a couple of partners I was working with, and one of the things that I typically like to do is try to make sure that they have their business documents in place, but also their personal documents. Business owners, and it's natural, tend to think of only that one issue, and that's their business, but they're not considering what their personal lives and their goals and how they come into play. Mm-hmm. And so these two gentlemen had put together and had established a buy-sell agreement between the two of them, previous 12 years before I met them. The bad news is, because they hadn't reviewed it in so long. When I asked to take a look at the agreement, I found that they did not have a signed copy anywhere.
Oh my goodness.
And you know what happens? We all have the same problem. We go get a will updated or whatever it is we need to have signed. The attorney sends it to us for a review, and then if it's okay, sign it or send it back. And the tendency is just put it in the drawer and we'll get back to it later. And in this case, they never got back to it, and the attorney kept tired of calling and sending emails.
And so were you able to catch that situation before it ended catastrophically?
Thankfully, yes.
Oh, that's so
because, if something really catastrophic had happened, it would have been too late. So we were able to get that. And fortunately, because so many things had changed, had they signed it, I'm not sure it would have been worse because of the way the buy-sell agreement was written. So, but it's just good, just like you would never dream of driving your car and never having somebody look under the hood. You need to have these things taken a look at on a regular basis just to make sure.
That makes a lot of sense. In contrast, I had the opportunity to talk to a really cool person last week who actually was a guest on my podcast, which, by the way, is called Catalytic Conversations. A little plug here. So this guy, Tommy Howard, was someone who took over a business from his dad. And so there was that transition period. However, his part of the business, he then realized after a few years that he needed to spend some time thinking about some of the things that we're talking about today, legacy. The interesting thing about their situation versus perhaps some others is that Squincher was founded in Columbus, Mississippi, which is a pretty small town. And so Tommy's business was one that the town really depended on. His dad had been in the beverage business and then started this sideline of Squincher, which was really at that point a competitor of Gatorade.
Oh.
But they, instead of going kind of the sports route, they went more industrial. So linemen, people in construction jobs, things like that. They have these little packets of these dry powdered electrolytes called Squincher.
Cool.
So anyway, Tommy realized that eventually that if he wanted to continue to take advantages of the opportunities in the marketplace, that he needed a buyer. And so initially he chose a financial partner, a private equity group. And he was very clear about what the goals and objectives were for that partnership. And so then as they worked together over a number of years, they arrived at the same conclusion, governance by consensus, and decided that now the company was ready for a strategic buyer. And so they actually sold that company a few years ago. And what I really thought was unique about this situation, in contrast to what you were just sharing with us, Jay, is that Tommy was very clear on some of his requirements for a strategic buyer, and it had to do with legacy. He explained to me that Columbus, Mississippi is a small town, and the other people in the company, people who had helped him grow this company, they wouldn't be able to just find another job if the buyer came in and then stripped things down, let everybody go, and then moved the company elsewhere. So his requirements were that they not only stayed in Columbus, Mississippi, but the buyer invested and grew the company. And Tommy still lives there. The guys still work there. And he said that the buyer has honored his request. Wow. And they have stayed, they have grown the company, and they've invested in the community. That's the way I think legacy should work.
Oh, that's a terrific story. I think it's easier to talk about legacy in many times when you're talking about family business, because there's always that concern or that desire, it seems to be, to continue this on for the ones that follow, whether they're necessarily family members or even if they're not family members, but employees who've been working with them for a while, who want to see that business to continue to survive and thrive beyond them for the benefit of those employees and their families and the community at large. Oftentimes, though, and makes your story interesting, is because this person wasn't a family business. But many times people say, well, Jay, I don't have family in my business, so what does legacy mean? Why do I care about legacy? And I had somebody give me some feedback, and I thought it was a great analogy. He said, well, Jay, how many times have you known of or yourself going to look at purchasing a home, and the sellers wanted to meet you. They wanted to know what kind of person you were, and did you have family, and what you do, and so forth. And I think, well, that's fascinating. They wanted to make sure that they had the right person who would appreciate that home, but also appreciate the neighbors that lived across the street and down the street. They felt like they had a responsibility to vet the person who was going to buy, even if it was not somebody who gave them the best offer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that works very much the same way in any business. It's having those concerns, and always about positioning your business, and try to find somebody who shares your culture, which is something we talked about last time.
Yes, it is. And I mention to you that I had gone to a Virginia Bar Association event last year and did my little anecdotal survey?
I don't believe so.
Well,
but then again, I'm getting old, so I tend to forget things.
Oh, well, for the purposes of our conversation today, the part I'd like to share is that it was so interesting. Most of the attorneys said that the thing that owners focus on to begin with is purchase price.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the negotiations, the due diligence, all of that is happening. And then somewhere around 2 weeks before the deal is supposed to close, the owner brings up, oh, by the way, it's really important to me to know what's going to happen to my people. And then it's oftentimes too late.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I admired about Tommy is that he knew that was going to be important to him. He knew that the company Squincher had a big impact in the community. And so he made that his priority, not only with the strategic buyer, but also with the private equity group. And I guess I would say to you as a coach that Jay and I can't recommend highly enough. You get really clear on what it is, the whole picture of what it is that's important to you when you either buy another business or you're going to sell your own one day.
I think getting clear is very important, which is sort of funny, but that's an inside joke we have. It can really make a difference. I knew of a gentleman who had worked very hard to find someone who was the right buyer for their business. And in this case, the right buyer was the person who had the money that they needed to get for the company. And this broker worked really hard to make that happen for them. And then when he had the deal sitting on the guy's desk, he said, just come back in another day or two and I'll have this ready for you. And he kept calling and and the buyer was putting him off, and then finally just stopped returning his calls. And he finally got over there to see him one day, and after 60 days, he said, what is going on? And the owner said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I know the money is really what I was over the moon about getting, but I realize that I'm concerned about my employees and what's going to happen to them. And I've been seeing them and feeling mighty guilty that I didn't consider them before. Mm-hmm. So they went back to the drawing board to come up with another way of how to address that concern that he had. And eventually they were able to do that, and they were able to go forward with that.
Great, because so often that sends the deal off the rails. Oh my gosh, that's a great story.
And oftentimes the people involved in the transition, or the transaction, I should say, really never knew what happened. It sort of goes away, and so that's why it's important. And in my work, I always try to talk to business owners about the importance of not only being sure of their financial needs and where they are, but also their emotional heart needs as well. That calls for consideration, because sometimes those priorities can be at odds with each other.
Yes, they can. They can. And that creates a lot of stress. Jay makes a great point. I think so often in business, we, in our culture, feel like the emotion has to be taken out of it. And you know what? We're all people. We can't do that, especially something that we've actually given our time and our attention and our resources towards.
It can truly be. I mean, money's emotional, but so oftentimes the unmet goals, if you're not really doing your goals, considering your personal goals as part of your exit strategy, you could find yourself really missing the boat. And oftentimes people think, well, you mean my only goal, I'm assuming, is just get the most money I can for this business, but there's so much more involved, and people tend to forget why they got into their business in the first place.
Right.
And so they need to have a process, which I know you're very much involved in, of getting deep and really finding out what is going to be important to you now that you're moving into a situation where you're not going to be the owner any longer. And what does that do for you? I think oftentimes business owners don't get out of their business because they're addicted to it.
Well, there's certainly, I mean, yeah, and they're certainly getting a lot of their self-worth, their identity out of that business. So, Jay, what are your top 3 recommendations to a business owner?
Well, just overall, first thing that I recommend is focus on thinking about what their goals might be, are getting in touch with those. You know, okay, so when you're not doing this anymore, if you had no choice to do this anymore, what would you be doing?
Right. Great,
you know,
great advice.
What is, you know, because you're not going to be, if you think you'll play golf every day, that's only good for 6 months, and then you're going to go crazy and need to think. So you need to think about what your physical goals may be. Do you want to go back to school and further educate? You know, we're talking about, we don't want to look at our transition or exit as the final phase, like we're dying.
Right.
But what's the next project?
Yes.
So that's very important. And then, like I said earlier, the second thing is know where that you are financially. Understand that, forget about what you hope or think that you might get for the business, but think in terms of what's that number I need. Remember that insurance company? What's your number? You need to know what that is. And then third most important thing is do evaluation on your business.
Yes.
To see if reality is anywhere in touch with what you think the business might be worth.
And what you mean by that is an independent valuation, correct?
Exactly.
Not one that you yourself do.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Okay.
Because you need to know where you stand. And if there's shortage, if there's a gap, okay, so what do I have to do with this business to cover that gap? Or can I invest enough in outside assets to cover that gap? Or usually it's a combination of the two.
Yes.
And I find that typically most owners, that's where the snags occur. That's why a lot of times they don't go through all the way with that transition, because they haven't addressed those first.
Yeah. Yeah. Listeners, I have to tell you that I really think Jay has delivered some great recommendations there. And I guess that I would add that the sooner you start thinking about your exit strategy, regardless of if you're in the very infancy of your business, whether you're in that messy middle, whether you're approaching the end of your career or maybe the end of this chapter and you have dreams for something you're going to do beyond that, following the recommendations that Jay just shared with you will allow you to reduce your learning curve, but also get really clear about what the possibilities and opportunities are there for you within your business and its value. And then finally, the other thing I would add is that doing due diligence as far as your prospective buyer, or if you're a buyer, as far as the culture within the seller's business, please give some time and energy and attention to that. Do some assessments along culture. How are decisions made? Does the company have a story about high times and bad times, low times? How does this company manage disruptions? How innovative is it? All of these things, and who made those decisions? So all of those things can be part of your cultural due diligence. And then finally, I would recommend not only evaluation, but a values assessment. What are your top 5 values? And then prioritize those. And then check for alignment with the other key performers in the other organization. So.
That's great. That's great advice. It is. What I would also say is that this is tough things to do. I mean, it's not easy while you're also trying to run your business and do all the other things. So it's, what I call transition or exit planning, it's a team sport. Find someone who could sort of be your lead, but beyond that, somebody who can put together the team. And many times those people that are on your team are people you're already working with. But you need some way of coordinating the talent and making and maximizing the dollars you're already spending by putting people all in the same space, in the same room, so to speak, so that everybody knows what your goals are and can provide you what you need to do in terms of making a decision. Because, as a business owner, we all know how to make decisions when you have enough of the right information.
I would also add that these things can be overwhelming if you're in the process of a transition. However, if you can start sooner rather than later, you can break it down into smaller steps that are much more manageable. So,
As you say, it's never too soon to start working on your transition planning.
yeah,
But it can be one day it can be too late.
that's so true. It's all about maximizing your returns and minimizing your emotional regrets. So, Jay, I think we've about covered our topic.
I think we've scratched the surface a little bit.
Yeah, for today. So join us next time, and we look forward to seeing you. And please don't hesitate to send us a question or drop us a line. You can reach me at wendybdickinson.com, or you can reach Jay.
Jay, and that's Jay, not Ray, at boesva.com.
Have a great rest of the day, guys. Bye.